Hello, my name is Glenn Alligood, and today I'll be talking about state-sponsored cyber attacks. First, we'll look at the definition of a cyber attack. A cyber attack is the exploitation of computer systems and networks that enterprises depend on for their day-to-day operations. This can be attacking anything from a laptop to a desktop PC to a server, all the way down to the mailroom and the copier. Cyber attackers change the computer code or logic that runs the machine. Then this exploit is used to commit crimes against the people, the enterprises, the organizations, or the nations. Next, we'll look at some different types of attack and modes that they use to attack. Trojans and viruses, phishing, spamming, and spoofing, along with spyware, are typical ways that everyone's heard of and ways that people attack. These are usually exploited through emails and attachments in emails, although they can also be implemented through links to certain websites that will install these Trojans and spamming and spoofing and spyware attacks. Also, hardware or software that is taken without permission from an enterprise or a company is also a type of attack. This occurs when someone who works for a company takes that software or hardware off-site without permission. They can then sell the hardware or software or sell part of whatever the hardware or software does to the highest bidder, which is an attack against the enterprise, nation, or company. The next type we'll talk about are DOS and DDoS attacks. These attacks occur when someone tries to deny services to a company or organization. Recently, there have been several of these that have occurred, and they've made lots of news. They're too numerous to cover and talk about each individually, but you can look and further research those on your own if you would like to. What happens is a request for a service is sent to a website or a server, and that request or actionable request is sent to the server many millions and billions of times, which causes the server to be overwhelmed, and it cannot respond to even a single request because it's getting so many in. Next, there are sniffing passwords for access or sale of that access. People try to obtain passwords to get into systems. Once they have that access, they may use it for themselves to gain access to files or any other type of software that they could get, or they could sell that access to someone who needs it to exploit that nation or organization. Unauthorized infiltration of systems can occur when people break into a system using a brute force password attack, or they may just exploit a hole in the code or a hole in a firewall to gain access that way. Defacement of websites is also a type of attack. This happens when people overwrite the code that runs a website to change the face of the website and make it display what they want it to display. It can be something that furthers their political agenda. It can be something that is just a defamation of that company. You've all probably heard of the Acme sucks type attack, where they put up some type of derogatory message about the company saying that they're terrible, they're no good, their products are no good. This can also happen. Instant messaging attacks can occur when people try to gain access to an instant messaging account to get information about a person or the person's system. Unauthorized removal of intellectual property also occurs when people take a company or nation's intellectual property and sell it or take it off-site and give it away or sell it to the person who has the highest bid. This occurs when you take patented material, copyrighted material, or any other type of material and exploit it that way. You can also make copies of it to sell. Now we'll look at the typical types of cyber attacks and how they begin and how they progress. The initial way the cyber attack begins is the attacker starts with espionage, and they start trying to find out ways to attack someone, different vulnerabilities and ways that they can gain access to systems. Once they have an idea of how to attack, they start phase 2, which is the actual intrusion. They'll send some targeted malware to a person and gain access that way, or other ways if they're using a different approach. Typically, malware is what is used to gain access. Once they gain access to one individual target, they can evolve that into an internal spread and cause secondary infections all over all systems throughout the company. They'll seize a system or an authoritative system and spread all over all the systems throughout the company. Once they have their spread and they're all over all the systems, then they figure out what they want to attack, and they start phase 4, which is attacking important documents and storage servers and gaining the information that they want about the company. This can cause serious leakage of information and loss of dollars over time. Once they have completed their process, they will go back and clean all their tracks and try to cover their trail so that no one can tell that they were even in the system to begin with. Once they clean those tracks, they leave the system and no one knows they were there, if all goes according to plan. Now we'll look at the motivation for some of these attacks. The main cyber attack motivations are cybercrime, espionage and warfare, and hacktivism. As you can see by the chart, cybercrime makes up the majority of what the motivation is. Hacktivism is the second largest, and then cyber warfare and espionage make up the last portion. Cybercrime involves ransomware, taking over systems and not allowing people access until they pay a certain dollar figure. It can also mean just stealing certain documents and then putting them for sale on the market to get whatever they want. It can also mean funneling money, wiring money from one company to another without the company that the money is being wired out of, without their knowledge. There are many different ways cybercrime can be committed. Hacktivism is when people take over certain websites or hack into websites to spread their message and spread their ideology. They can also take down certain websites that they feel are offensive or are causing damage to the environment or certain causes. Cyber warfare, which is what we're dealing with today, is when a nation state attacks another nation state to gain access to their systems for different purposes. Now we'll look at some of the dangers to ordinary citizens from cybercrime and state-sponsored cybercrimes. Attacks on schools and universities, such as University of Calgary attack, where the University of Calgary was hit with a Bitcoin ransomware virus. They were forced to pay $20,000 to decrypt many of their files. Rutgers University was also hit with a DDoS attack, many DDoS attacks, and it kept people from accessing the systems for a substantial amount of time. Nation states typically attack larger targets such as power grids, such as the attack on the Ukrainian power grid, which took out 700,000 people's power for an extended period of time. Most experts agree the United States power grid is not up to date and is not ready for this kind of ransomware or attack. The United States needs to move forward with our plans to upgrade our power grid and our infrastructure to make this less of a vulnerability. Next, we'll look at who are the major players in the cyber attack atmosphere. If we look at the chart that I've displayed, China makes up the vast majority of internet traffic, although they don't have as much internet access to their people as the United States on a per capita basis. When you dissect the traffic coming from China, you see that many of the DOS and DDoS attacks are coming from China, from Chinese servers. The US, North Korea, Iran, and Russia typically rely on more targeted attacks. And yes, the US does use attacks on other nations to gain advantages. North Korea and Iran, and also Russia, do the same thing. A recent attack that was seen in the news was the WannaCry ransomware, and it has been linked through several different organizations back to North Korea. All of the web information I could find points back to North Korea as the source of that attack, which goes to show that nation states are sponsoring these attacks, which is something that we were already aware of, but it's becoming more and more obvious as time goes by. As we look at these attacks and see where they're coming from, we wonder, is there any legal justification for a nation to respond back to one of these attacks? Currently, there's no structure provided internationally that says you can respond or cannot respond to a certain cyber attack, or what the level of attack has to be before you can respond to it. The same principles of armed attack are currently applied internationally to cyber attacks. That being said, since we don't have a certain level that we can attribute a response to, or a justified response to, it's a little confusing to most of the nations of the world as to what justifies a response. Many nations are trying to come together now to form a consortium to discuss this and to set up some rules and levels of response that are justified. We'll also look at who are the main targets of these cyber attacks from nation states. Businesses are typically attacked to interrupt trade and to gain advantage through theft of trade secrets and other things. And this is also conducted by nation states from time to time. Sovereign states typically create attacks to disrupt government services from other governments and to stop advancements in weaponry. The United States has used that many times in the past. One prime example is when we stopped the nation of Iran or slowed down their progress towards gaining nuclear capabilities. Sovereign states are also attacked through their power grids and other infrastructure that is provided to their citizens. This destabilizes the country and can also lead to power shifts and power changes, which are often the target of a nation state. Recently, we've heard rumblings of other countries interfering in elections. That can also occur. They can't, so far as we know, technically change the outcome of an election, but they can flood media and markets with stories and such things that have very little basis in truth or fact and can therefore influence elections. These are just some of the things that sovereign states use to try to inflict cyber attacks against other countries. Let's turn our attention now to what we can use currently as a defense. As one might imagine, education is the front line of defense. Associates should be educated about the dangers that can be presented through cyber attacks, such as email, browsing, social engineering through social sites and other means, and physical security. I mentioned before the sticky note on the desk with the password on it. That's a perfect example of physical security. Also, the next current line of defense is making sure our software is fully patched. OSs and software should be fully patched at all times. that will protect against a lot of attacks that are known, and known exploits that are out in the world. Firewalls should also be fully patched and should also be put in place to help prevent attacks. Filters for web and email. Most people don't consider web filters as prevalent, and they're not as prevalent as email filters. Web filters work great if they are configured and constructed in a manner so that they protect and while allowing access. Some of these devices can take a substantial amount of time to configure and to keep configured properly, but it is well worth it to have that security and that peace of mind in place, that you know you're doing all you can to prevent a cyber attack. Also, upgrading operating systems and software versions. This is different than just patching. I'm talking about completely upgrading. This is a best practice for preventing cyber attacks in the long run. Newer versions of operating systems are built to better protect against most of the cyber attacks and things that are going on these days. There are statistics available that show there are still many systems, servers out there that are running Server 2003. There are also many systems in certain areas and companies that are still running Windows XP. There are many systems that need to be replaced, and it is costly, but while it is costly, that cost is a lot smaller versus the cost of losing all your information. There are some very innovative things on the horizon that are going to be put into place in the very near future to help thwart cyber attacks. One of them that is really promising is using artificial intelligence to detect and chase cyber attack information down and verify whether there are actual cyber attacks occurring or not, which will eliminate a lot of false positives and save a lot of man hours. One such application is IBM is now ready to use its Watson system as a cyber attack chief, pretty much. The Watson system can learn and train itself to detect cyber attacks, and also it can learn the difference between an actual attack and a false attack or a false positive that's just out there to lead someone astray. Another innovation that's been in place and has been used for a few years now is keeping all of your devices outside of your data network. By keeping your devices outside of your data network, they don't have complete access to your data at any time. This creates a firewall, so to speak, between your devices and your data. With the Internet of Things getting larger and larger, it's a very good idea to implement this. With IPv6, it helps with making sure that there are enough IP addresses for all the data, for all the devices that you might have in place. By creating this distinct boundary, you only allow access to individuals and devices when they need it and at certain times. You can restrict your access a lot more to data, thereby protecting your data. In conclusion, advanced cyber attacks are expected to grow in number. This number is going to explode over the next 10 years. Fully applying all preventative measures available is imperative. As this number of attacks increases, we're going to need to make sure we have put all these measures in place. Everyone should become aware of new innovations and strategy as soon as it's possible. No one should just be sitting back and waiting for the next attack to occur. You've got to jump out and go full force into preventative measures and get them in place before the attack occurs. Everyone should be proactive, not reactive, on this front. I've included some references and also some further discussion articles that we can look at, including the one I mentioned about the Watson fight against cyber attacks. Thank you for your time.